I'm aware that this is the last panel of the day, so I will mainly be communicating through memes. I think it's the meme time of communication. So here's my first meme. Self-help books, how it started, as we've seen, well, the Hebraic Christian tradition of scripture or the Greek tradition of philosophy, how it's going, this proliferation of so many different titles and things to pick from. So, well, how did this happen? I'm in a very bad position to talk about this because I have not read a single self-help book. I flicked through many of them. I find them fascinating because like this magical recipe to become perfect and have a perfect life. But I've never read any of them. So you'll have to trust my lack of experience on everything I'll be saying. The growth in the personal development market lately shows that we have about 43.8 billion going into that. And it might be a niche market, but it is the fastest growing market at the moment, with subjects such as mental health, motivation, physical health, self-awareness, skills, all of these fall into this category. Where does this happen? Well, of course, you can see that's there. It's a very American thing, you know, it's just, you can do anything, you can achieve anything. Next day you can be president of the United States. Wonderful, wonderful people. My husband is American, so I can say that. And but you can look at the other space where the market is also growing around here. So it's not just a North American mindset anymore. It is getting global in some sort of way. So this raises several questions, such as, well, why do people buy self-help books so much now? What was the shared wisdom that we had in the old ones that we're not that interested in nowadays? What has changed through the 20th century that can explain that? And more importantly, do these sale figures mean that it works? So what did self-help books used to teach? So that's another how it started. I don't have to talk much about Socrates. We talked about him a lot this morning, so that's great. Being strong, holding to what you believe is truth is a constant element of this idea of virtue as strength against adversity. And you find that in the Christian tradition as well, former models of virtue again. The self-help book that was the most influential in the Middle Ages was The Golden Legend by Jacques de Voragine. I don't know his English name. So it was a collection of saints' lives, and many of them are rather gruesome because they end in martyrdom. So if you want your collection of chopped heads, people getting skin flayed, all of that, it's the best book for that. But the purpose of it was not to be macabre or sinister. It gave people a model of strength no matter what their situation in life was, whether you were a young man like St. Sebastian, patron of the archers and military forces, or a young woman like St. Agatha. No matter how weak you are, you had the strength, by the grace of God, to remain faithful to your truth. Later, when Christianity was not persecuted anymore, this idea of martyrdom evolved into mortification, mainly through the growth of the religious orders, which personally, I think it culminated with St. Teresa of Avila with her way of perfection. So how to achieve perfection when you're not even in the world, you're within the cloister, and how can you become virtuous there? Another model of virtue, well, right at the end of the period we're considering, Mr. and Mrs. Martin, very ordinary saints, canonized recently. They were, she was making needlework mainly, and he was a good family father when his wife died. He took care of his children, all that. So virtue in the small scale of family. You don't need it to be extraordinary to be actually extraordinary virtue in the Augustinian sense of the term. And these two gave us Sainte Thérèse of Lisieux, who had this whole theory that everyone can be a saint, no matter where you are, and, well, that's also another question, no matter how much of a dreadful, dreadful sinner you are, you can, on a snap, become a saint. If anyone wants to ask me a question about that later, I'd be very grateful. what this had in common was still very close to something that we can find in Aristotelian ethics. For Aristotle, well, there's a sentence that is often quoted, sometimes misquoted, about the good shoemaker finding pleasure in making good shoes, and the best shoemaker is the one that will strive to make the best possible shoes. But if you look at the sentence in its context, the best shoemaker is working just as a good general, making the most of what he has, and what is often overlooked is making what he can with a given piece of leather. So suppose that your life is your piece of leather, you have to make the most of what it is as it is. So it's extremely practical, this sense of virtue. So it's a virtue as a praxis. Each and every occasion gives you the chance to make the right choice and get trained in choosing what is good and avoiding what is bad. That's the old-fashioned catechism way of defining virtue by comparing it to vice. Which leads us to this. I'm putting it 3 times in big, in red. Ontology comes before deontology, which means it is what it is, comes before you gotta do what you gotta do. You can't do anything if you don't take the given situation into account. So being virtuous is not about having a far distant model that you will try to imitate. It is about being virtuous in your given circumstances. And we can see that in the way the popular books of the late 19th century promoted the idea of being virtuous in your given circumstances. So you can find so many books about how to be a good young lady, how to be a good housekeeper, how to be a good maid, how to be a good gardener. And these had to do as much about doing your profession well as about behaving, having the ethos that matched your profession. And of course, being magnanimous when you're a general is not the same thing as being magnanimous when you're a mother of 7, but both are expected to be magnanimous, and that's a sort of megalopsychia for all. Everyone is called to exercising virtues in the highest possible way. But this has changed. Now, happiness is the supreme virtue. If you look at how things shifted at the very beginning of the 20th century, there is this autobiography of Douglas Fairbanks. Just look at how happy he is. Don't you want to be just like him? I mean, it's just wonderful. Love and live. Yes, sure, of course. And in the middle of the 20th century, Dr. Norman Vincent Peale, The Power of Positive Thinking. These two didn't come out of nowhere. There was a whole growing process of thinking about how positive or negative thoughts impact the way you see the world around you. And, well, I think there's nothing wrong with that, but it resulted in a very strange trend of popular psychology in the late 60s, early 70s, which was cut off negative people from your life. And the wonderful thing about that is that it's never you who's toxic, it's always someone else. So the result of that, look at that. Eat, Pray, Love. How many of you have heard of the book? Just raise your hand if you have. Good. Yes, excellent. I see it's still somewhere in the mental picture. So Eat, Pray, Love sounds like a wonderful title. It is, however, Madame Bovary, but with American Express debit card. It's the story of a New York journalist who gets fed up with her life and her husband and everything, and she just decides to leave everything and go to Italy, go to India, go to Indonesia to discover her deep, true self. The story was extremely inspirational for many people. It was adapted as a film. As a side note, Elizabeth Gilbert, why am I misnaming her? Elizabeth Gilbert left her husband and then married another guy, left her second husband, and is now with her best friend, who is a woman. So she said, I'm not living a midlife crisis. I just have to be true to myself all the time. So there's this burden of following exactly what you think is good at any given time. I think it's incredibly heavy burden, but many people seem to have enjoyed it because, look at that, it's Eat, Pray, Love made me do it. So some people were so inspired by this book that their testimonies were collected in this sort of Eat, Pray, Love for all. And what I find wonderful is that they ended up becoming Elizabeth Gilbert. They ended up becoming the tellers of their own story in this pattern of this is how I'm going to achieve my deep, true self. So in a way, they all secretly wanted to be this fancy New York journalist, which brings me to this very important, I'm sorry that the writing left out of the screen, but that's from metaphysical desire to mimetic desire. When we want something, usually it can have something to do with our practical desires. We want to eat, to drink, whatever. We need to satisfy our biological needs. But this is always framed in such a way that we also try to satisfy what René Girard, the philosopher who developed this, calls metaphysical desire. If I want to eat, I have the choice between eating a lousy sandwich brought from a dingy shop or going to a fancy restaurant. And when I go to eat in a fancy restaurant, I might get the exact same amount of proteins, glucids, everything, but I'll get the added satisfaction of belonging to the category of people who go to the fancy restaurant. I don't want the food, I want the belonging. So this is what René Girard calls the triangulation of desire. I want this, let's say eating in a fancy restaurant or becoming an empowered Western woman. The mediator here is what I will forget about. I'll try to forget that someone has pushed me towards that, but I will run towards this, and many self-help books would present this as your ideal self, the self that you have to become, but by validating everything, every single need you might have. And I'm not saying that all self-help books are like that. There are some self-help books that are really about self-challenge, and you see that in their covers, extremely effective, all that. I'm fascinated by the social phenomenon of Jordan Peterson, who basically tells the sons of the Elizabeth Gilbert generation women what their mothers didn't tell them. Make your bed, stand straight, talk politely. Why do you look like that? Girls will never talk to you if you don't behave better. So that's the void that Jordan Peterson is filling. So I'd like you to look at these pictures, these covers, and then look at these. These are not the same. These, out of context, look extremely neutral. They look extremely masculine if you compare them to the self-help books that are aimed at a feminine readership. So Big Magic is by Elizabeth Gilbert too. Girls, Stop Apologizing. Well, apologizing is actually good. It's the basis of civility. And it's fine to apologize. And then Super Attractor, it's about the law of attraction. If you really, really want something, it will happen. I've tried. No. So this all leads us to the self-validation unicorn. These books tell you that whatever you want is good in and of itself. You don't have to worry about vices, virtues, anything. The fact that you want it validates it as being good. The problem is that most of the time, well, you won't get it. So does self-help help? One problem that many psychologists noticed is that self-help books often encourage social contagion. You read something, you want to do like this. So the Elizabeth Gilbert phenomenon leads me to wonder how many women in Italy, India, Indonesia would dream of being the fancy New York journalist. And also it's extremely anxiogenic because it causes a feeling of temporal dissociation. Your happiness is always something that is postponed. You send it until something else is accomplished, whether it is perfect social justice or dismantling patriarchy or abolish whiteness or whatever, or even taking whatever kind of hormones or going through whatever kind of surgery to get the body that matches what you think you really are. So this leads Bridget Jones to write, maybe it helps if you've never read a self-help book in your whole life, but the law of the market is such as Bridget Jones wrote a self-help book herself. So one thing that we notice about readers of self-help book, They listen more than they read. Audiobooks have replaced the human voice that gives you advice. They are on social media a lot, which means that they receive this advice through peers in their social bubble, and they do not read other genres. So my advice, know your piece of leather, read more fiction. By reading fiction, first, well, there's the Martin Nussbaum idea that you are confronted with moral choices that you don't actually have to make, but it trains your moral sense. But also, it allows you to see that your life is actually yours. It's not someone else's life. It's not this self-help book writer's life or this novel heroine's life. It is yours, and a lot in it and a lot of the happiness of the people around you will depend on the moral choices that you make. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. You said there's a search for happiness. What kind of happiness is it? Is it hedonistic, Epicurean, egoistic?
Well, there is something that goes out of all these categories. There is something that can seem very hedonistic about it, about I'm going to fulfill my desires, but the amount of moral pressure there is about being true to yourself doesn't make it look very happy. It makes it look like a stoicism of happiness, a burden of trying to find that magic little thing that would make you happy. But so it doesn't fit really these former established categories. It somehow takes the worst of all and combines them.
We talk about the distinction between personality and character. Mm-hmm. Are these books more about acquiring personality?
The ones that are aiming towards self-validation are about exploring your personality. The other ones are more about building character. So if you look at the self-challenge books that I've listed, they would all have advice like wake up early, exercise, watch your diet. If you compare them to the mentality that would say that, well, if you're morbidly obese, you're beautiful in your own special way, even if you're going to die in the next 5 years while you're 25, it's not the same mentality that they promote.
Mm. I also know very little about self-help books, but I know about cooking books because my friend buy books about famous chefs, great recipes, cooking, elegant kitchens. But the more they buy, the less they cook. They come home with trays of pizzas and they order hamburgers from Foodora. Could it be that you just sort of buy this book and say, I could be a better person? I don't have to read the book. It's so much trouble to read it. It's so much trouble to live according to these rules.
I think the problem you're touching has been addressed by Plato in Gorgias with his comparison between the doctor and the cook. The cook will provide you with the kind of food you think you want. It will make you extremely happy, and that's what the sophist does when he gives you exactly the speech you want to hear. The medic will give you something bitter that might make you feel unwell on the spot, but might save your life. So maybe your friend is trapped in the sophistry of cooking books, deferring the satisfaction of the perfect meal until all the cooking books have been read, instead of going for something extremely practical, nutritious and tasty and just going for it in cooking.
I'll go home and tell them. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.